This is Dan Tracy. I'm here together with Johannes Gerloff in the Black Forest, and we're talking about his new book, the Palestinians in German. It's actually not too new in German. It's been available now for quite some time, but we're doing it now in English. And this is probably the most complete work describing the conflict from the standpoint of Israelis as well as Palestinians. And you give some wonderful historical background. You give background as far as international law is concerned, the League of Nations, the United Nations. So I'm here to ask Johannes several questions about the book and about what what his vision and goals are for the book. Well, Johannes, you've lived in Israel now for many years. You're a professional journalist. You've gone through all sorts of things in Israel, in its development, and also in the development of this Palestinian conflict. How did you come to end up in Israel?
I've been studying theology, basically in Tübingen, and then later in Vancouver, and in BC, and then in Prague, in Czech Republic. That's because of my wife is from there. And after my studies... Is that
because your wife was from there, or did you meet her there?
No, because my wife is from there. I went there in order to learn my in-laws' language. The whole family is speaking Czech, so that's the only way to communicate with them. They don't know German, they don't know English. Basically what we had a question afterwards what we are going to do, and it was a longer story, but we ended up working with the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, and they asked us in 1994 to move there. And then in 1998 I was asked by the Christian Media Association, KEP, to build up a correspondence bureau for them in Jerusalem. We work for a whole bunch of Christian media in the German language area, not just Germany, but also Switzerland and Austria.
Okay. Johannes, you've lived and worked as a professional journalist in Israel for about 22 years. You live there with your wife and your children. You've covered times of relative peace, but you've also risked your life to report during times of war and unrest. Tell me in a few words, if you would, why have you dedicated your life to that part of the world?
First of all, I, in a way, was thrown into it. I grew into it. It wasn't a decision that in 1994 that we say, now we go there, we stay there for the next 20 years. We went step by step, and it was really the Lord leading us. But I discovered that Israel is a very central part in the Bible. The land of Israel, it's not an accident that God revealed His word there. And up until today, what is happening there with the nation of Israel and the surrounding nations is, let's say, the focal point of what God does with this world and in this world, and what the focus He has for in the plan He has with this world.
We're here to talk about this book. This is the German version. It's called The Palestinians. Volk im Brennpunkt der Geschichte. What did we call it? People in the focal point of history. And in the book, you let Palestinians speak, you let Israelis speak, you have a lot of personal testimonies of people that you've spoken to in the relationships that you've built. What do you want to achieve with this book?
Look, I went to Israel originally because I was interested in the Word of God, and I discovered that there is the nation, the people of God, Israel, and then I was called to be a journalist. And the point is, if I'm a German journalist, for Germans, it's very important to be objective, to see both sides. And I realized I have to get into that, and that was the first trigger, let's say, that I realized I did not see the other side, that means the Palestinian side or the Arab side at all. So I really dedicated about 10, 11, 12 years in really getting into Palestinian society, getting to know them on all different levels. And I discovered then later on that the Bible actually is full of the other side. You cannot understand Abraham and the calling Abraham God without seeing that the very first, or the very focus of his calling is be a blessing to all families of the earth. And it starts with the Palestinians. So it's not an easy relationship. Actually, it's not a simple thing to understand them, and it's full of conflict, full of complicated things, especially if you get down to where the rubber meets the road. But it's something fascinating, and especially also seeing on that background that you want to better understand what God is doing, what the Bible says.
Now, as a long-term journalist in Israel and the Middle East, you've developed relationships with people on many levels, both on the Palestinian side as well as the Israeli side. Now, how do the Palestinians, or Arabs living in Israel, whatever is most politically correct, you talk about that in your book as well, how do they relate to their Jewish peers off camera?
The very moment you have a camera in front of your eyes, you're different.
Yeah.
You think, you have different lighting, you know that somebody else is listening. The moment I step into a room, I have a camera, I have a microphone, people switch. Actually, I have in this book a picture of an old lady I met, I think it was in 2007, right after the bombing of Gaza. We went into Gaza, and it was, when we took up the camera, she wept and she was kind of complaining on how difficult the situation is. We put down the camera, she built relationships with us. She was in her 70s, 80s, but she was beautiful. And she was starting to flirt with us. The people were sitting around. And you know, it was like putting a switch around in your in her head or in her person, putting up the camera, she was crying, putting it down, she was kind of building the relationship on whatever level you went with her.
Now, is that the same? Did you notice the same thing in the higher levels? I mean, you deal with government officials, you deal with people on really every level of their society and the leadership pyramid. What kind of differences do you notice there?
I would say it is on every level. And people are, especially in this Israeli-Palestinian conflict, are very much aware of publicity, are very much aware that they're in a constant way on a silver platter there in Israel. I think the most amazing example was when I was talking to Alan Baker. He was part of the negotiating team for Oslo 1 and 2, as far as I remember. And he told me stories of sitting together with all these Palestinian leaders, and they built relationships. They were meeting in hotels to then discuss the real issue. Yeah. And then once he saw Saeb Erekat as spokesman for Arafat on CNN, and he called him up right afterwards and said, "Saeb, you know what you told there was a blatant lie. Why did you say that?" And Saeb at that point just answered him, "Alan, you do your job, I do mine. Just shut up." And this is, you know that people talk about it, they talk face to face about it. But the point is, if you're in as a reporter, and if I ask somebody with a microphone and with a camera, I cannot say in front of the camera, "Listen, you were lying." My job as a reporter is to say what is the official spokesman saying. And even these stories, I mean, I said the names, I said where it was, yeah. I think it is, and I'm not saying now it's just the Palestinians who are lying. Yeah, we had similar things on the Israeli side, where they simply are aware of, we have to give an image to the world. Propaganda, the images you're sending out is a big part in today's relationships. People
so what we really have here are people speaking out of their hearts. They're not on camera officially. They're talking to you. Are they aware that you're a journalist? Do you think that they're playing the same game with you in the testimonies in this book?
I tried. I very hard tried. First of all, I'm not sure that I'm always seeing it. I say it in the very beginning of the book, the better I got to know the Palestinians, the more I was aware that I do not understand them. And that is one of the points, one of the problems we have with Middle Eastern societies, that we as Westerners, as Europeans, as Americans, there's a huge understanding, a huge gap of understanding each other. So, but I tried, I had the off-camera, I had the on-camera kind of experiences. And what I also have is that sometimes you have the, how shall I say, the long-term point of view. You know, there's the impression, let's say a house is being destroyed, I'm getting there, and they tell me what they think. I can ask the army normally will not tell me too much about it. Mm-hmm. But the good thing about this book is that I can say what happened half a year later. What I found out half a year later in the example of the destroyed house, I found out that I was in the very family of the guy who sent all the suicide bombers into Israel. Wow. And the army didn't tell me because they didn't have him at that time. The family only said, look, the brutal Israeli army came in and destroyed our house in the El Aida refugee camp. Yeah? And only half a year, 3/4 a year later, they shot him accidentally, actually, and then the whole story came out.
Wow.
But then the house was gone, you know, and the house story was gone. They only, at that time then, they only shot somebody, and well, it was a name and it was a terrorist, so it wasn't that interesting anymore. But if the house of the civilians was bombed, so and again you have these incidents that happened, the reports with people, and I tell you, through my eyes, I very much focused on what I have seen, what I have experienced. I did not want to get into the, let's say, the overall discussion. And therefore, it's very much also a source book that gives this specific experiences at specific times.
Well, that's the feeling that I got as I'm reading through the book. I'm still working through it, but even what I've worked through, the feeling that I get is that there's a pretty true portrayal of both sides. People are just telling their stories. And so the reader has the opportunity to draw their own conclusions, to understand the situation probably a little deeper. Like you said, we had the report of the house being destroyed and this terrible brutality of the Israeli forces coming and tearing down a house. But the fact is, it was the house of the terrorist that was sending a multitude of suicide bombers in to kill Israelis. And that part of the story was never really told in the media, at least not in that context.
We could not tell it, because today we're living in a media time where you have to very fast, goes it out, and you want to have, it happened now, you want to know what happened, and the day after tomorrow something else happens, so it's gone. And that's also why I put the book together, because I see that a lot of the things, you have to show a broader picture.
Yeah.
And it is an attempt, let's say it that way, it is an attempt to show that broader picture. Actually, in the beginning, I try to follow up where the term Palestine comes from.
Yeah.
So I give you also a little bit historical background, and the term Palestine has went through an interesting metamorphosis. I mean, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, in English and German, the term Palestine was a term for an area like Black Forest. It's not a political or Midwest, something like that. If you take it to the States, it's not a political term, and today it's a highly political term. If you look into guidebooks 100 years, 115 years, 50 years ago, there's talk about Palestine, but you don't have Palestinians at all. They talk about the people who live in Palestine, like the people who live in the Black Forest. Yeah, but it's not. And today the Palestinians is as if they are today they are a nation. Yeah, and if we talk about Palestine, we dream about a nation state, and it says the state of Palestine on all the official papers you get from Ramallah. Even though there is none, but so it's a dream of a nation state that is being put more and more into reality.
But actually has never existed.
No, it hasn't existed. But look, this is, for example, something I know that people are making, if you ask that question, so you say it's never existed. I mean, before the United States were founded, they also never existed. And something came into being with the United States. So it's, from my point of view, first of all, totally legitimate that people are being born, nations are being born. Now I'm not, and therefore I look at that, I realize in the end, you started in the beginning saying there might be a difference, do we talk about Arabs in Israel or Palestinians? Today, the term Palestinian always bears something anti-Israeli with it. If an Arab in that area cooperates well with Israel, even sees himself as an Israeli citizen and serves in the army, and there are people like that, serves in society, he will never call himself a Palestinian, even though he might be of the same family or tribe.
A question that becomes important in looking at the book and understanding what this book entails, it's unique, Johannes, in the way that it's put together, in the way that it's presenting the story. Normally you either have this side of the story or that side of the story, depending on who is broadcasting the report. But here, probably for the first time I've seen it, there's a balance to what you're saying. You're giving historical information. You're giving information that has to do with international law, with the result of the consultations among nations after the First World War, after the Second World War. It's a very interesting and balanced work. Now, what do you hope people will gain from reading the book? Can you say that in a few words? Do you have that kind of a hope, or are you just throwing it out?
Normally, and I say that from a German point of view, but I sometimes have the feeling it might be more human. That means everybody thinks in a way like that. We see two parties fighting. We want peace. So we say, I'll listen to the one side, I'll listen to the other side. And then I try to, maybe I have to decide whether I'm pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian from whatever point of view. If I'm more biblical, I'm pro-Israeli. If I'm more talking about human rights, I might be more Palestinian. But what my goal is, or my impetus is, get to know as good as possible and as sober as possible, and then make your own choice. And I'm not looking whether I'm pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli. I want to get my own opinion as a German, as a Christian, and I might draw my own conclusions that Israelis might not like, that Palestinians might not like, but I have my own standpoint. And if I can be of help, I readily want to be. But that's all second and third steps. The first point is to get an own standpoint.
Yeah. Well, that would be the next question. Why is it so important that people should have this insight? For many people, it's not an issue. For many people, we like to ignore it because it's a difficult situation. But from your standpoint, why would you say, if you were speaking to people, why they need to read this book? Why is it important that they have this insight?
It's interesting, actually, that in Christian circles, you have to argue that Israel is an issue, at least in Germany, maybe less in the States. You have to make people understand that Israel is important and the whole conflict around it. If I ask the American president, the American foreign minister, from their point of view, it is the issue. If you talk about the Middle East conflict, you're not talking about Syria, even though in Syria at the moment are more people being killed during 1 year, more people during 1 year than in 70 years, the whole existence of the State of Israel, all wars together on both sides.
Wow.
That means the conflict around Israel is very central, most interesting. But it is one of the most peaceful conflicts actually, or one of the most unbloody conflicts we have in this world.
That's an interesting
I
statement.
mean, therefore, why is it so focal? And you have to ask the world. I was in New Zealand, and I realized that they talk about the Middle East conflict. They engage in pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli. They think it's very important. Why don't they solve their problem with the Maoris first? I mean, and you in the States also, you have also problems with the original inhabitants. You're also living in occupied lands. I don't want to attack you on that. We have it all. I can actually go here into Germany. It's the same thing. We always had population migrations. We have it at the moment, that all the Syrians and the Iraqis and the Africans are coming in here now, and it's a big problem for us. So, but we are focusing on this one conflict. The Palestinian refugees have their own organization in the United Nations, and all the other refugees together have their own. Why is it? From a secular level, I do not have an answer. It is something that is interesting, that's amazing, but I do not have an answer. From a spiritual level, from a theological level, yes, I have an answer, because this nation of Israel is chosen by God for a very specific purpose. The purpose is very easy. Jesus, Yeshua, says salvation comes from the Jews. That means God has chosen that nation in order to bless the whole world, and there are forces in this world that very adamantly want to prevent the world from being blessed by God. And that is the background, I think, also for all this hatred against the Jews. And if I'm talking here at some points as a German for Palestinians, I am doing this because I'm afraid. I have a big fear for those who are getting caught by anti-Semitism. I'm not afraid for Israel. Anti-Semitism, even the most organized anti-Semitism in Germany, was not able to extinguish this nation. In contrast, it triggered something new, something amazing, for example, with the State of Israel. It was part of the trigger. But look at Germany in 1945. Look at German cities, 1945, and you see what anti-Semitism does to the anti-Semite. And we have to understand, and the Bible says that in different parts, you have to understand, if we raise our hand against what God is doing, we destroy ourselves. And because I have Palestinian friends, I don't know how to do that. At the moment it's so emotional, but if I would have the possibility, I would like to shout, to cry out, say, listen, look at what you are doing to yourselves, not to Israel. And that's actually what we see. If we see the wars, if we see the situation, who is on the losing end? It's the Palestinian side. By the way, there are a lot of Arabs who are taking the other side and make a decision to go with Israel. I do not have that in the book because it's the Palestinians. But if you look, you have in all layers of society today in Israel about a fifth of all, 20% of all Israelis are non-Jews, are Arabs. And you have them in all layers of society. The highest judge who sent a prime minister and a president of Israel into jail. We don't know in Israel whether we should be proud of that or whether we should be ashamed. The highest judge who sent them there is an Arab. If he would have another political opinion, if he would live, let's say, 50 kilometers away from where he was growing up, he grew up, he might call himself a Palestinian, but he's an Israeli. The commanding officer who commanded the infantry troops into Gaza in 2014, his mother tongue was Arabic. So, and he's a non-Jew. So we have in all political parties, you have Arabs in Israel promoting the so-called settlers party. So there is, the question is on what you're focusing.
It brings up an interesting question for the individual, particularly for people that are viewing this now. The question is, what do you do with the information once you've had it? Once you've read the book, once you've understood, I would say, a pretty good depth of the issue, what would you like people to do with that, Johannes? And let's maybe separate the question between those that are praying Christians and those that are maybe not Christians at all, that are just secular individuals. Is there anything practical that you could suggest for those two groups?
There is a lot of practical things for Christians to pray, for Christians and non-Christians to get informed about the issue. We have today the BDS movement that tries to boycott, to divest and to sanction Israel in order to influence the whole settlement policy, for example.
Yeah.
And if they would get into the land, if they would see what is going on the ground, then they would see that the BDS movement is basically having two results. The one is it's hitting hard on the last remaining Israeli, Palestinian or Jewish, Muslim, Israeli-Arab relationships. I say from my Christian point of view, politics is one thing, and we can disagree on politics or agree. But I think we should be clear that as Christians we would like to promote relations between neighbors.
Yeah.
Irrespective of their religious or political or whatever opinion. And if something is destroying relationships, then we should be very critical of it. The second thing is it hits first and foremost economically the Palestinians. And I have seen hunger. I have seen Palestinians selling their land to Jews because of BDS. Now, if this is what you want to achieve, go for it. But I think a lot of the BDS people are not aware of what they're doing. And maybe I add a third thing, they're promoting a dictatorship. And the people, the Palestinians in the West Bank today, I'm not talking about Gaza at the moment, the Palestinians in the West Bank are living under a military dictatorship that is being promoted and backed up by the West and financed by America.
The military dictatorship being Hamas, being the Palestinian?
No,
or
Hamas is in the Gaza Strip. We are talking about the West Bank, and it's a very complicated military dictatorship because it's Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah and his Palestinian Authority being backed by the Israeli military. And I say what you see from a Palestinian point of view, what Palestinians experience is de facto a military dictatorship. And there again, what I would like is, first of all, look at it. Maybe at the moment we don't have a better option.
When you say backed up by the Israeli military, are they being used in a way, or is that the political result of Oslo, or why would...
Look,
are they knowingly doing that?
I take you into the elections in the Palestinian areas in 2006. And we had the West forced Israel and the Palestinian Authority to let Hamas participate in this election.
Yeah.
And overnight, Hamas, who is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, achieved a 2/3 majority in the Palestinian Authority.
Yeah.
Now, why I say military dictatorship? Because nobody wanted to recognize this election result, and we kind of promoted and pushed the Palestinian Authority to keep in power, because we think they're secular. We think we can talk to them. In the Gaza Strip in 2007, they pushed themselves. Those who were democratically elected pushed themselves into power. Now, look, it is in the interest of Israel and it's in the interest of the West that if we have the choice between a radical fundamentalist, Islamist, Hamas or Islamic Jihad, or if we have a more secular Fatah dictatorship, we choose the more secular Mahmoud Abbas. I don't say that I'm against him. I just say that this at the moment is a result, and we think we can get there a kind of a democracy. Now look, the point is, in our relationship to the Palestinians told me, you only want democracy for yourselves. If we choose and if we elect, and that's what happened in 2006, you do not recognize it because you don't like it. Actually, something very similar happened in Algeria in 1994. Something very similar happened in Egypt with Morsi being elected. And we have to deal with that because if we, in the end, impose on these nations what we think is good for them, that won't work in the long run. And it especially won't work with a democracy. We have to see, we are now celebrating 100 years of remembering 100 years the Sykes-Picot treaty from when after World War I, the Allied powers divided the old Ottoman Empire among themselves, and they created all these artificial states in the Middle East and Northern Africa. If you look at the map, they have lines like drawn on a drawboard, yeah. And at the moment, what we're seeing in the Arab Spring is that it all falls apart. We don't know what's happening. And it's an incredible amount of bloodshed because it's not homogeneous. And now I'm not saying I think we have our Christian and we have our Western values and we should stand for them, but we should also be realistic that there are other parts of the world where you can't simply say it will work like it works in America or in Germany or in Europe and even here.
Now that was a very good point. That's one of the things that came out very strongly to me, is that by doing what we're trying to do, what we're not taking into consideration is their culture, which is more tribal, which is more whatever, which is more, it's just not a democratic culture that they've grown up with or that they even really understand. So we're trying to impose something on them that is outside of their grid somehow.
You know, we're imposing even more on them. We disregard where our human rights come from. They're not universal. And I'm agreeing that I would like to see them to be universal, but I have to acknowledge that if somebody from China comes and says, I don't know what human rights is, or an Arab comes, we have to understand that our understanding of human rights grew out of the Enlightenment. I can go back to the Reformation, and there is a Christian root to it, a Christian-Jewish root or Judeo-Christian root. It grew out of the Enlightenment. It grew out of an emphasis on individualism. You have in the Middle East a collective kind of understanding, and the honor of the family, of the tribe, of the clan is much more important than the well-being of the single person. If, for example, a young lady, only by creating rumors, is touching the honor of the family, her own father or brother or cousin has to kill her, even if he loves her. But the honor of the family or the tribe is much more important. So we have to understand that this is not necessarily bad.
It's just different.
It's
very, very different.
Yeah. I actually got that when I talked to somebody who was close to Hamas about that, and he explained that to me. And then he said, I think in our collective society, an old person will never die alone and forgotten in an apartment somewhere in a city. It gives a lot of food for thought if you think this through and if you talk to these people and let them first of all explain their standpoint. And then maybe, and I think that will be also, if we want to reach a solution in the Middle East, if we want to see a more peaceful Middle East, we have to involve these people, we have to understand them, and we have to go with them, not against them.
Specifically in a way that somebody could look at this and in 2 minutes get your answer, what should the praying body of Christ be doing with this information?
first of all, pray that the Lord will open our eyes to what the situation actually is about. Let's say goodbye to our dreams, even if they're pious dreams, even if we find them somewhere in the Bible. Let's get down to reality. And the second point is, yes, get involved. And there are several levels you can get involved. First of all, spread the truth. Get informed. Go there. If you have the money, or if you don't have it, save it and go. By traveling to Israel, you have an impact there. By letting see yourself, by talking to people, you show them they're not forgotten, but you can also say your opinion and say it in love. Let's ask the Lord for love. And then there are all kinds of different levels, up to the point that people are getting economically, by the way, economically on both sides involved, getting people together. And I would say, just let's get a good Bible-based opinion on this, and let's be a, how do you say, what do you say, a good smell of Christ.
A pleasant fragrance.
A pleasant fragrance.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank you for the interview. It's been fascinating, excellent information, and I just want to say God bless you for the efforts that you're doing, and may He bless you and guide you as you go on from here. This is probably one of the most important works that you will ever be able to read about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's going to give you insight that's going to help you make the right choices. It's going to give you insight that will enable you to understand and to share with others some of the things that are really going on. So I would just invite you, have a look on Amazon. The book, The Palestinians by Johannes Gerloff, Gerloff. You'll find this book online, download it, get it, read it, and share it with friends. This could make the difference in a real solution in the Middle East. Thanks for watching.